I would like to invite Alejandra, the Deputy Ambassador of the Spanish Embassy in Bangladesh, to introduce Monica Allende.
Thank you, Shahidul, and thank you for giving the opportunity to the Spanish Embassy and to Spain to participate once again in the Chobi Mela. We couldn't miss this occasion, the 10th Chobi Mela, the 20th anniversary, 20 years. And also to join the great team, Tansim, Riza, Ragnuma, Priti, Shahidul, and this big family of the Chobi Mela. And I'm very happy also that you have shared with me your knowledge and always helped me to discover new artists, curators, photographers, in this case Monica, which I have to admit I didn't know before this event, but as soon as, like 2 months ago, Riza and Tansim told me, look, we want to bring Monica Allende, I did a small research and I thought this is great. Hopefully she can make it. And finally she made it. She just arrived. And Monica is a curator, educator, photo editor, and so many things. Such a long curriculum vitae. I couldn't learn it by heart, but what I learned is that she has been the photo editor at the Sunday Times magazine. She's a lecturer in London, where she has lived for a few decades, and also in Madrid, in the most important school in Madrid, in FT, and well, in some other locations she has participated in photo jury important awards around the world, and she herself has received many awards as well, as the Amnesty International Media Photographer Award. And besides that, she has also produced and curated important work of important photographers about humanitarian conflict contexts related to what we were listening before, like about Darfur. And I think Mr. Gary Knight would stop having problems maybe with photo editors. I don't know where is he, maybe he left already, if he would have the opportunity to work with Monica Allende. So welcome, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the, the introduction, which is great. I feel very privileged to be here. I always take the invitations to be able to speak about my work. I take it not only in a very humble way, but also with a sense of privilege and responsibility. It's been for many years that I been wanted to come here, and Sahidul and Munem, they know this. It's been challenging for different reasons for years, and then finally this year it was meant to happen. So this is really exciting. If one thing that you can pick up from this curriculum, you can think different things. You can think, oh wow, she does all these great things, but you can also think she's very restless. And I think that's important to try to understand which sort of person I am. Is the idea of curiosity. It's curiosity which drives me. So that I keep evolving, I keep changing, I keep sort of starting something, trying to resolve it in my own mind, trying to kind of make sense of what is important for me at every specific moment. And that is why I keep adding to all these different sort of different roles and different hats in terms of what I'm doing with my career. But one thing that I trying to understand about myself is that I'm very interested in process. The process is very vital for me, is what really drives me. And then the final destination for me at that point is being resolved, and then I'm already looking for the next stage. Transmedia. I choose transmedia as a very, very specific lecture to discuss here today. But it's not everything that preoccupies me at the moment. It's just one specific aspect. I'm always very worried about the concept of visual representation, but we are not going to be talking about that because that it has all these branches. I'm very preoccupied about the whole idea of ethics, and I'm very preoccupied about the whole idea of my own set of values and my own set of beliefs in the context of the industry in which I work in. But that is a completely different discussion. We are not going there either. So I thought the whole idea of transmedia, we are going to be looking at it from the specifics of engaging with tools. This could be digital or non-digital. Every single time we think of transmedia, we all think in digital terms. And platforms where we are engaging with new audiences and we are actually exploring where we can actually project our work. And what I have decided to do is just to show you works that I'm either working with or I find them very representative of the whole idea of transmedia. Why do I think transmedia? I started this journey when I left the Sunday Times magazine in 2015. And what I realized myself at the time is that I like to be in the conversation. I like to be in the conversation of the time, of the moment. And for me, I'm not a person that I'm particularly sort of technology driven in terms of I like to read books. I grew up in the analog world, which I still sort of embrace. But I realized that my conversation would not be effective if I wasn't really understanding what was behind in the digital area, in terms of coding, in terms of programming, in terms of ethics. So I embarked in this kind of really sort of new research and trying to understand how we could actually engage with the narratives which we are producing, always trying to be much more effective. So I think it's particularly important for visual journalism, because visual journalism is very much about being now, being current, being topical, and not kind of sleepwalk into the oblivion, which I believe has really happened in the digital area to a certain extent. So I'll start with the first creative lab that I produced. It's just a little promo that we put together, just to give an indication how we actually thought in terms of what transmedia actually meant. And this was a collaboration that I did with a group of thinkers, and it was screen projects. We were based all over the world, and then we came up with a screen lab, and then we produced several projects. Since then, we have all moved on, and we are all engaged in different projects at the moment. But for a moment, it was very important in terms of the type of ideas that we were actually putting together.
For centuries, humans have been creating and sharing stories, talking, painting, writing, photographing, filming. But storytelling is not anymore about choosing one tool and one platform. It's about finding the right combination to reach your audience. And Screen knows how. Apply to Screen Production Lab. Get your stories out.
We produced two labs, two creative labs, one in London and one in New York. And at the time, we were kind of exploring how we could actually construct narratives in a different sort of way, engaging with different tools, and again, trying to find new ways of distribution. The group that it was kind of involved, they came from film, they came from lecturers at MIT, fellows at Harvard, producers, photo editors like me, thinking in terms of content. And we were all sort of working together with maximum 12 people in the very kind of in-depth way. First of all, we were working with the whole idea of how collaboration was actually working, how you could get these 12 very strong voices and trying to actually make them work together to create a kind of a group in engagement that there was going to be a kind of collaboration that could be actually shareable. Then we were deconstructing work, and once we actually deconstruct the work, we started to rebuild the work. So we did two 2 labs from that. And then basically what we were trying to play with the whole idea, and Transmedia plays with the idea, is to break the concept of lineality, lineal narratives, lineal structures, and then to move more towards the idea of multi-platforms. Starting with, this is a very basic sort of idea, starting from the idea and trying to engage with different platforms from that idea. Not thinking of the delivery platform, not thinking in terms of I'm creating a body of work, which is going to be a book. That is one of the major problems that I encounter at university. For example, when I go to FT, I'm working with students in very early stages of their careers, and they're already visualizing the book before this work has actually been resolved, before they have actually sort of self-reflected in which type of creator, which type of artist, or which type of documentarian they feel they really want to be. They're already visualizing the book. And they're there to visualize the platform before you can actually resolve the work. We consider that to be very problematic in terms of the transmedia, in terms of the creative labs that we were working. So we started to think in terms of long-term ideas, long-term concepts, and then engaging with different platforms, with different sort of voices. It wasn't the idea to translate one aesthetic into all the platforms. It was the idea of resolving aesthetically how this work is going to work on each platform. And one of the, for me, one of the most successful and clear projects to actually visualize this is Sakari Kanapari. Trying to see.
The yellow one.
Yes. Well, we are going to close it. We will open. No, because we can't do that. We lose it. We will get it again. So going back to Flint. Flint, Zachary had already sort of, he's with Seven, so Gary knows him very well. I know Zachary since my very early stages of his career. We published in the Sunday Times his early videos that were already incredibly experimental and forward-thinking. And then he was part of the creative lab that Screen created in New York. So it's when they started. At that point, he had already directed and released the first part of the project, what it was T-Rex, which is a lineal, documentary, character-driven project. And on the back of that project, he realized of the different aspects of Flint. When he discovered Flint through the eyes of T-Rex. And T-Rex is an African-American boxer whose dream was to win the Olympics as the first female Olympic champion, which he managed to achieve in Brazil. So Zachary went to Flint, where she's from, to get to know her, to film her, and through her eyes, he got to know the city. And he realized that Flint was this incredible case study which show the fragmentation of the American society. So he started to develop all these different chapters. At this point, he had this vision that he wanted to create this episodic documentary project. And each chapter, it has a completely different identity. And here is when transmedia really comes to its own. It wasn't the idea that he was translating across platforms the same sort of visual aesthetic. He was creating different visual aesthetic for the different platforms. So this is the final result that he created from all these years of work. He's been working on this for several years. he created this website. It's like a tank. And in this tank, you can actually see all the episodes coming to the run. I opened this so you can actually get to explore it later and see them. It's an amazing website. We work with people that they come from Colors magazines, that there was the Benetton funded project in Italy, and a very experimental type of collective. So he worked with people, and then that they come from that background of thinking and crossing established boundaries in a way. This is just one of the platforms. He did a collaboration with the New Yorker just to focus on water. One of the major challenges that Flint has is the poisoning of the water. So in this collaboration with the New Yorker, it's very interesting the kind of treatment that he actually gives to this project. If you contrast this against the project, the first project that was T-Rex, which follows this kind of linear sort of documentary film tradition.
They got a sign over the water fountain say that drink at your own risk.
My nephew started getting tiny bumps and red little rashes on his body.
The principal kept saying, don't wash your hands if you have a cut.
We thought he had cradle cap because, like, you know, his hair kept falling out.
They kept taking him back to the doctor. They couldn't say what was wrong.
Months and months we've been drinking this water and we had no idea what we was drinking.
You can't really get around it.
When I wake up, I got to brush my teeth, taking a bath, washing your hands, washing dishes.
I was giving my daughter and my son the water.
My mom used to make chicken noodle soup with water. Watering your plants, washing clothes, taking a shower,
Cooking with it.
wash your hands with it.
My girlfriend was pregnant, you know, she was drinking the water.
Are those ice cubes from the water?
Boiling macaroni in it.
Making coffee, rinsing off your fruits, vegetables, meat.
Did you wash that lettuce in Flint water?
Wash my hands, I wash my face.
Every single day, that's something we use. Every single day.
You know how hard it was for us to retrain our children that they can't turn on a faucet? When we see all over the TV about our toxic water in our hometown, it does something to you. It makes you fearful.
trust nothing. I really don't.
I don't trust them. I don't trust, no, I don't. I don't, because we people, and they're not treating us like we people.
How can I fight this? You're supposed to be able to protect your kids, and it's something you can't protect them from.
Everything water touches, I wouldn't trust it. Not at all.
I don't trust at anything that they say now. I don't think I would ever. They could have this whole place knocked down and picked back up. I don't think I would ever drink their water again.
So this is one specific treatment that he did for this specific platform and this specific magazine with the New Yorker. Then he had a different, one thing about Zachary is that he completely embedded himself in the community. So each chapter and how he treated each chapter, for example, he created a virtual reality in collaboration, co-produced with the New York Times. And he had been shadowing the police department in raid and during several years. So he had all this wealth of material, of video and filming, and he was considering, to do a short film. But when this collaboration came with the New York Times, he kind of revisited that idea, and he decided to actually go back in and kind of shadow the police like he had been doing, but kind of use the treatment of virtual reality, because that was the kind of collaboration that they were actually experimenting with. When, for example, he did a book that he did, and then there is a section, chapter on the proms, looking at the youth, he took up a job on the local newspaper. They were looking for a prom sort of a photographer to do the standard official portraits of the prom. So he took up that job in order to kind of really understand and get to know sort of the people in the community. And from the back of that, he actually created this project. And there is a community-led project that he was also interested to create this collaboration with the youth center and create a newspaper, a free newspaper, trying to create a dialogue between their understanding, their perception of themselves, and what he actually was bringing into the equation. So there are all these different platforms, which are standalone platforms with different sort of visual languages, starting from one concept and idea. And of course, after that, Netflix kind of commissioned him to do the series recently. He has been shortlisted for World Press Photo, but this has been kind of years of him building, many years of building and getting deeper into the understanding of this city and this project. Pulimi Basu, Blood Speaks, which is a transmedia activism project. This is a trailer. This project is not intended to be viewed this way. It was shot as a VR experiences. There are 4 individual cases that she actually directed and created these special virtual reality experiences. She photographed on the back of that, and then she had some sort of short videos. But the piece is meant to be virtual reality, trying to transport the viewer. She was always playing with the idea to trying to kind of transport the audiences into that confinement which the girls, and the women experience. This was shot with the support of the Magnum Foundation. And the first time that me and Pulimi worked together, because we were trying to work it out, how virtual reality can be translated into a kind of a photography festival environment. So the first test that we did on this was in format in the UK, just trying to kind of what type of engagement you get with the wider audiences, as trying to cross the barrier of the virtual reality, that barrier that technology sometimes creates. The piece was shown at the Kathmandu festival recently, and the Kathmandu festival actually brought in some of the girls to actually see the project in the space. That is la página, that is the web page. If you are actually interested to actually see, she built this web with the whole idea, because she always intended this project to be activist. It wasn't her intention, it wasn't just the idea that it was going to exist around the photography festival. So she has got not that all her work is like that, but this specific project was created that way. This is a piece by Josh Bigley from Fields of Vision, supported by The Intercept, that for me is the most exciting media group that is currently producing really incredible visual journalism. And he used 200,000 Google images, Google Earth images, which he pasted together to show the complete length of what would be the border, what it is the border between the United States and Mexico. And he produced this piece as a result of the Trump elections, and that is what is called the best of luck with the world. And I showed this piece in Mexico for the first time. I took it to Mexico 2 years ago, to the Museo Amparo in Puebla, and it's very interesting to see how the response, from the museum space to a piece like this, which for me is how I can see visual journalism moving forward and using different type of tools to actually create extremely effective and sort of pieces using data in a way, visualizing data. Using YouTube existing videos only in YouTube, both mixing the narrative, the official narrative, Russian official narrative, and the private narratives from private citizens, and it creates this kind of dystopian narrative that exists in Russia in relation to the events that are happening there, especially in Ukraine. This was actually designed as an immersive installation. It was designed to be a piece in which you actually walk in and you have these two different narratives, full volume coming from conflicting and coming from audio pieces, and you only have sort of one point of entry and one point of getting out of this installation box. This was co-produced again by Screened with Alexei with the Russians, with Alexei, which is a Russian director. This is a piece by Ali Islami, which is virtual reality. Ali is an Iranian coder and programmer. He produced this data visualization in virtual reality using the language of gaming, which was the type of programming that he had available to him. He produced it all from his terminal in Iran, meaning that he didn't really actually produce it in collaboration with any groups outside his room and his space. He used the language of gaming, as I said, and he combined real data, and he took the number of victims that died during a year, either drowned in the Mediterranean or as a result of the terrorist attacks in Europe. He won in IDFA in Amsterdam the best emerging project 3 years ago. We are only going to see a little bit of it, but so this is the installation that you have, and this is a trailer of the virtual reality. So when you're here, you're already in virtual reality. So this piece takes you through all these different sort of fictional reenacted in gaming language landscapes. At some point you are going to go under the water. You have these similarities of streets in Europe. He will introduce sounds of trucks running over the streets. So the veracity of the data, and that is how we see it, is in the corpses that you come across. And then estimated data, we should say. One thing that really, I have shown this piece twice as well, and when you're actually, the virtual reality, well, we are not going to go into visual representation, but there is always these studies about the increase of empathy that you feel when you're actually immersed in virtual reality, and how you feel the response that I have from the audience, both professionally and non-professional audience, when I saw this in the festival 2 years ago, of all the pieces, of all the narratives, of all the stories that I have shown that year, this is the one that actually touched people the most, that responded, the audience that responded to it the most. One thing about Ali, which I always found it very relevant to this discussion, because we always have to think in terms of the cost and the resources that they are required by the use of technology. Ali produced this piece by himself with limited resources. He's in Iran. And then when he did the presentation in IDFA, he was actually with all the challenges that you have got being an Iranian. So he made this interesting remark about when the piece became known, he got a call from Google that they were very interested in collaborating with him. And of course, he was ecstatic. He said, brilliant, this is great. Only to receive a second call from Google a few days later, realizing that they couldn't work with him because he was Iranian, so having sort of difficulties with sanctions, so it was impossible for him to do that. So that doesn't stop him not finding different channels. It's just you have to be very creative around it and trying to find sort of third agents that in a way are going to be supporting your practice to resolve all these obstacles. The obstacles like, for example, that when he gets invited to festivals, most of them, unless it's something like IDFA with the machinery that go behind them, he wouldn't even consider because of the obstacles of getting the visa and all the problems with that. But currently, at the moment, he's producing stuff in Holland. He has moved there at the moment, so he's there. But it's interesting just to see this idea of thinking, well, it's technology, this is award-winning technology, but this technology started just very much in somebody's room with his tools and with his terminal. Dries, the porter, he's a coder and a hacker. So he created this in real time. I have shown this in loop, not in real time. This is the piece, this is the final piece. So he creates these screens. We have got peatonal crossings. So he created a code around the idea that you see the peatonal crossing, you see an individual crossing when the lights are wrong, so the lights are red for the person. And then he created this program that you, as a viewer, have the power to actually press this button, and this button is going to generate an email going to the local police station with a screen grab of you crossing the street saying, jaywalker, this person has crossed illegally. He always played with the whole concept of privacy and surveillance, but also I'm very interested in the piece for this idea of the ultimate God, no? Who is behind making the decisions. He's constantly producing, he's constantly having ideas, but his language, the tool that he uses is coding. That is what he speaks. He can translate that to apps, he can translate it to physicality, he can translate it to hacking, but what he speaks is code. This is a project that I've been collaborating with an artist, Anton Casters, for 4 years. This is the piece, they are Polaroids. It's a project that reflects on trauma and memory. He started photographing this 5 years ago, he just finished, and he photographed 1,078 Polaroids above the blue skies, above every single concentration camp that existed during the Nazi regime. So he always decided that he wanted to do it in Polaroids because he's interested as an object that fades and trying to correlate that idea of the fading memory. And something remains, but what remains? So each Polaroid will have sort of engraved the GPS of the exact location plus the approximate number of victims that would have died beneath it. And then we show it for first time last September as a piece, known on the world. We created this almost monumental piece with all the Polaroids floating. And that was one idea, but at the moment it's going to go to the Holocaust Museum as a piece for a year in Washington, and it's going to be actually installed on the wall. He had to create an app for this piece because it was impossible for him to get to the places he needed to get to without having sort of an app where he had entered the GPS of all the locations, and then that enabled him to actually find them. So he has this app. We always play with the whole idea of the app being an interesting idea that if we could sort of eventually, create an app that creates a sound. Every single time you could be driving through parts of Europe, you will have a blink coming up if you are actually driving with Google Maps. So we play with ideas all the time, but this exists already. And then, so he's done a collaboration with Ruben Samama, who is a composer from Holland, and he created a soundscape void of music, trying to avoid any kind of unnecessary sentimentality added to a reflective piece. And Ruben entered the data into a program, and then he creates a code sound for every single concentration camp and for every estimated number of victims, created a sound piece that is long 13 years old. So here we have put, this is a test piece, we put sort of museum sound just to see how it will sound against the cold sort of blips that you will hear from time to time. So it's very faint, it's not invasive, it makes you think because he appears from moment to moment. We did test at the beginning, sort of filming, the whole idea of transmedia, of the whole idea of gathering visualization, gathering sound, and these were pieces that they are finally not being used. But at the beginning, he was actually doing time lapses on the sky from this is in Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, for example, he was actually photographing and trying to see, how this was going to be visualized. At the moment, it's going to be a film. So we are doing a test for a film at the moment, and it will be done in a much more traditional linear way, trying to actually explain the piece from a much more descriptive way, a piece that is already quite is powerful and conceptual. So we are going to go to a much more descriptive way with the film. There is a book as well, and then that is where we're working. It will be actually shown in Photo London, and we're taking it to format. Totally different project that I did last year was a collaboration with WeTransfer. Like I said, I'm restless, but I'm always very interested. I have always been in. One thing that interests me very much about WeTransfer is when you have sort of a platform that has got 40 million users a month. And they know this and said, well, we want to do something with content. What can we do? We like serendipity. We like the whole idea that there is no structure. We like the idea that it's random. We are about randomness. So when they asked me to come in, for me, it's the idea. I said, yes, I really want to be able to see if there is a dialogue that we can have, trying to kind of not control the randomness, but trying to actually put an idea forward, which is much more of accidental encounters. So I work with WeTransfer on this project.
You know our planet's in crisis, but do you know what that looks like? Wildlife's being wiped out. Mammals, reptiles, amphibians, birds, and fish are losing the fight right now. Forests are being decimated as we speak. Hail Mary for the hardwood, bless the trees, rest in peace. Welcome to the dead zone where the oceans used to be. Plastic soup we're cooking up with our homemade recipe. Skip the pleasantries. A dying ocean gasping for the air it lets us breathe. Not to mention that our so-called fresh water's running out. We're dancing for some rain, but instead the gods bless us with another drought. As our hearts get colder, temperatures are rising across the globe. Picture that. Look at it. Feel it. No discussion. Now you know. You know our planet's in crisis. Do you know what it looks like? Come see.
It was always designed as a campaign. It was always the idea trying to give content a much deeper sort of thought and meaning than just sort of the randomness that had been the signature to that point. There was a scientific research, which is the Union of the Concerned Scientists, which is available. It was actually published 25 years ago, and they revisited a year ago, and they identified 6 areas of urgent concern around climate change. So the idea was to try to find work that we created 6 chapters, and each chapter was actually answering to the chapter of the scientist. Always bearing in mind that the language and the platform of WeTransfer requires a very sort of immediate response. You have a minute, you don't have a minute, you have a second. So it has to be sort of images that is really sort of clear, very direct. But we couldn't go to very complex narratives because you don't really get the response. So I was going back to that kind of traditional sort of visual journalism and traditional photo editing that actually is where I actually come from. And that all the projects were actually chosen with that idea in mind. WeTransfer as a platform to look in terms of how to engage with photography is there. It's interesting to see. Again, they like the randomness, they like just to for me it's very interesting to see how they want to engage with content going forward. There are platforms that they are really emerging with intention of wanting to do something, with capital to do something, but you get to a point that you think, well, how this, for me personally, this is a personal sort of a personal reflection here, which is not what intended today with this lecture, is trying to see the consistency and the continuity long term. I find it easier to do something very specific short term. I find it much more challenging to actually find these conversations, being sustainable with a kind of 5-year vision, for example. And that's the challenges that I'm encountering. I don't find the problem to create the projects. I find the projects just to see the sustainability and the vision for this type of projects going forward. Interactive web documentary. I always chose this one from any others because of its simplicity and also because it's character driven. So a lot of the problems that I encounter with technology is how void of emotion it is in many occasions, how the form drives the content, and how there are points in which the content gets completely hidden behind the form. And in this particular case, produced by Al Jazeera, they really go back to focus on the individual. They really go back, they create a very simple form, which is a template, which is easy to navigate and to follow, but you never lose the first voice person and the personal experience and getting to know that person. And for me, this is why this interactive web documentary, which is very simple, is extremely engaging, and in a way kind of lasts with you. I'm not going to show it, but you can have a look and navigate it at home. There is a moment of engagement and participation where you can actually leave a comment and so on. And forensic architecture, based in Goldsmith University in the UK, emerging as a in group, researchers, producers, creators, artists. They are in everybody's mind at the moment, and I don't know if I find this a little bit problematic. I followed them for years. I'm completely, I love the work they do. I love the approach that they have. I love the forensic research. I started the collaboration between journalists, researchers, and architects. Evidence, it was kind of at the core of the thinking behind them, to be able to use this evidence in court cases, in international forums, to have this real evidence being there to be used for, for a greater good. That was very much the thinking behind, and it is behind forensic architecture. Last year, they were shortlisted for the Turner Prize in Great Britain. So now they are actually translating, they are transferring into the sphere of art, and art is actually welcome them very, very keenly into their arms. I mean, I was in a lecture of a curator last week, and they put them as an example of going forward for political art. Again, at one point of reflection, and I've done workshops with them, I've been to lectures, I've seen these exhibitions in Mexico City, I've seen it in Spain, I've seen it at the ICA in London. I think what worries me a little bit is that when we get so enamored by something, when everything becomes so, we are looking for answers that they are so deep, and then suddenly we think we have found the answer. We stop being critical a little bit about, we lose our ability to have sort of a self-critical in our analysis. And that is where I find myself a little bit. I think they are absolutely brilliant. I really like the work, but I think that I need to balance it with some kind of critical eyes as well. This is a piece that they did, reconstructing memory in collaboration with Amnesty International. This is Assad prison in Syria. They work with prisoners that they have managed to escape. They interviewed them. They were interviewed by psychologists. They were interviewed by professional teams. They were working with architectures and designers. They were able to build this piece based on the memory of prisoners that they haven't actually seen it because they were blindfolded on the duration where they've been prisoners. So they started to work with the whole idea of memory from sound. So in order for them to build, they started to realize that being blindfolded, they could actually work the distance that I have from here to the door. Because if I'm always blindfolded, there's going to be a point in which all these sounds in this room are going to be my memory landscape. So they work with that. And in base of doing that, in putting this team around it, is how they build the most accurate, view of what this prison looks like. And this is very much, I'm only going to show you one website very quickly, just to show that, going back to, just to close, very much what I said at the beginning, that I'm very interested in process. And then recently I was actually doing a workshop and I think of everything I did last year, after reviewing everything, this probably creatively is what it fulfilled me the most. So I was asked to come to Chile for a week to work on a festival and give a workshop, but they said it has to be done in real time. So the challenges if you do transmedia in real time is that you can't really, I don't know what I'm going to find, I don't know who has got the skills to, I don't know what technology I have. So there were a lot of obstacles. But that is the ethos, that's the philosophy of the festival. And for me, it was incredible to arrive to a place in which we structure ourselves in a completely collaborative, different way of everything I have done before. All the kind of egos have to be actually submitted to the project. We had 1 week. We have extremely limited resources. We were experimenting with things. We created a website. We created a catalog. We created an exhibition. All the projects, they have audio, they have video. We use the Instagram. We use drones. And this was done in 7 days in a place that was alien to most of us, in one space that when we arrived, we realized we didn't have Wi-Fi. So, and that was the first thing that we had to resolve. And within no time, organically, how everyone grouped together, and they were actually, and this is no idealism, this was the idea, okay, we are going to do this, we have got these skills. So the first thing we all have to put on the table, a list, which skills do we have? And it's unbelievable because you have people that they realize, well, I work in the theater. Fantastic, we have got a stenographer here. All the skills that you have to look very deep into you when you have very little resources. And suddenly you have incredible amount of resources of skills on the table. So the website, if you want to see, you can actually, I only brought one thing. I brought a topic for everyone to answer to that topic. And the topic was about neoliberalism, because Chile is the birthplace, is the first lab where neoliberalism was put in place. And under Pinochet, with the blessings of the Chicago Boys and the United States and the Western powers. So for me, it was very interesting and very poignant to go to Chile and thinking, okay, we have a geopolitical system that affects us all, but this is, you were the lab test for this. So let's see how we in Valparaiso can respond to this topic. So everybody with the skills, they have to actually respond to that topic. And that's that. That's that. So I'm very happy to take questions, if you have any questions.
I suppose this is somewhat of a question, but more of a concern. Although you did mention it yourself a little bit as well, sort of the limitations, that technology does sort of pose, and also the lack of criticality. I'm from Nepal, and when you did share the work from Nepal, I suppose it just sits really a bit uncomfortably because I guess the one question I do have is what kind of activism this particular project is initiating, because it is a loaded term, it is an important term and thing to do. But then when projects such as this, and this one in particular, I'm afraid I have to say, is projected in that way, especially in faraway places, faraway festivals, etc. And when one realizes, coming from where I do, that there is a huge disconnect between what the project perhaps is claiming to do and perhaps is actually being able to do on the ground. I do know of the work being showcased quite recently within the Kathmandu International Film Festival, and that one participant from the project, subject, quote unquote, had been invited to the screening. And then one of my first reactions was, just respond to the technology bit. I'd been familiar with the work a little bit, and then to see the VR piece was just really jarring for me, because it was, just the question was like, why? Because I was looking forward to seeing the work moving forward and evolving, but I wasn't at all expecting it to go into that direction, because if the objective was to create specific kinds of audience engagement and specifically activism, then I really felt like that bit of technology was adding absolutely nothing to the work. So I just wanted to, I suppose, share that. But hopefully we can also chat more about this outside of the space today.
Like I said at the beginning, I personally have a lot of preoccupations, but in the time that we have at the moment with the time frame, you see that I have focused very much on tools and platforms, like I said at the beginning, because every single conversation that we have, there is a whole set of ethical and morality discussion at the moment, which has to be reflected on. We not all have got the ability or wish or are in a situation, or we are coming from the same perspectives to reflect on everything. So as individual practitioners, that's something that we really need to ponder. And for me, it's extremely important that each individual actually considers what is it that your vision, your skill, and your destination, which can well be money. So that is one point. When it comes to the technology, we can question a lot of ethicality about the technology. But I believe that we have actually blind walk into a black hole of not taking control of the technology. When I mean we, that I never use these we's because it's too grande and who does mean we. I mean the visual communicators, that is who we are. We've been having a small, but that's me again. Every single time I'm having all these small conversations, I'm losing sight of the bigger picture. So then we find ourselves in 20 years' time that none of us can successfully leave Facebook because this has become the platform on which we're all having a conversation. I think that's very problematic, because I think from the beginning we understood this was problematic. So how come we kind of blind walk into this hole where we are at the moment? So I think the idea of trying to have knowledge about what, and this knowledge we don't know where it's going, but at least you have empowerment by the education to understand we have got this language that is being developed. We have to test, because we are in the testing moment. By thinking before we test, we're already walking away from it. I don't find it comfortable, but the first time that I thought about virtual reality was from Gabo Aurora from the United Nations, and they were the first investors of virtual reality, because they were very interested, and this was very early on, when it was very few people, documentarians really using the language of virtual reality. And they were very clear, they were very interested on the results and the empathy that was created maybe they weren't interested in your empathy, but maybe they were interested on the policy makers' empathy when they have a meeting of 20 of them in New York. That was what they're aiming at. They were aiming at that it's challenging to bring people to the situation, but if you could bring the situation to those ones that can affect policy, and they are all sitting in one room, and you have a language that is going to be uber emphatic, is going to raise empathy. It was a conversation to be listening and to be exploring. So that it was really caught my eye. I'm thinking, it's clunky. It's super clunky. It's clunky as a producer, it's clunky as a viewer, but the CD was clunky. It's the stage is going somewhere. We don't know where it's going. I just want to keep an eye. That is how I see it. The piece was effective or no? That's something always seen, but it was interesting for pulling me to explore the whole idea of the piece. Trying to kind of think of the response. I do a lot of work around the idea of audience engagement, and it's an overused language, because what does it really mean? So,
sorry, there was a part where you talked about how it's been relatively easy for you to think about short-term projects, but difficult to think of long-term projects and keeping them sustainable, but you didn't explain why. Please, would you?
Well, I was referring very much to WeTransfer, right? And projects with platforms similar to WeTransfer. Because for WeTransfer it's very easy because of the structure to think, well, we want to do something which is campaign-led, is going to be focusing on, we are going to step out of our comfort zone of never crossing over into any topic that is being seen as political, right? So it is easier for me to come up with a project and resolve it and do it. What I found it really challenging is to actually think, can we develop this project to be here, not me doing it, but the continuity of this idea in the next 5 years. And that is, I'm seeing quite, in my, only can speak from my perspective, I can see a lot of conversations that they are project specific. So I have this project specific, because we are looking for results now. It has a lot to do with market and funding as well. If you look for funding, it's project-based, right? They're not looking about, and if you have sort of capital value, cultural value with your community, that is not transferable to your funding. So all these change in a way in how we actually have to produce projects. And every single time you produce a project is going to be the final destination where you are being evaluated on. It's very difficult to actually get funded for a project for the next 5 years, because the first 4 are going to be about community engagement, because it's very difficult to quantify that in terms of resources and real terms of value. That is what I was trying to say.
Thank you for sharing all these interesting projects with us. I have a very basic question, actually. With regards to the project about the wall, you showed it to us as an example for visual journalism. Why is it journalism?
I thought, because I'm trying to think of journalism outside the traditional terms of the visual representation of the traditional visual representation of traditional photojournalism. And I'm trying to think of visual representation going forward, but still is using very much data and documentary data as the foundation for that project. So the specifics of the data in terms of the topography, in terms of the line, is very concise, is very small, but is very effective, because visually you are able to see the challenges that maybe they are difficult to see with words, but you can see it very quickly. But I think in terms of visual journalism, because I think in terms of that tradition of following the research and adding to figures. And the visual representation for me is something that it doesn't preoccupy me the most.
I was talking to the head of artificial intelligence at Netflix recently, and he was describing how since Gutenberg, mass media has been one way, but that now they're going back to the original storytelling way by listening to the audience as they're engaging on the Netflix platform. It feels to me like this has that kind of potential. Are there any things that you're doing along that path?
To more reflective type of journalism, you mean?
No, where you can respond to how, in real time, how the viewer is engaging.
I started to be honest with you, the first project that I have done really in real time has been this project in Chile. Not that I haven't done things in real time, but we have delivered. We deliver text, we deliver idea, we deliver sort of, and I haven't resolved it yet in terms of writing. Someone asked me recently, said, "Oh, have you actually written about the experience and the process?" I mean, it was last November, and I haven't even sort of processed it myself. I knew when I was doing it intuitively, because first I put myself in the field, so I respond intuitively. That is how I am. That there was something that creatively, something happened there that I haven't experienced before. And I've done creative lives before. And maybe it could be sets of equations of who we were and where we were. But, you know, I felt that it was kind of I've been working a little bit with the whole idea of the self and the ego and the problematic that we have as documentarians, because we're all very driven. And that becomes problematic when you collaborate, because we collaborate as, from me. And if we're all me, we're never collaborating. And we had encountered problems with collaboration in London, and we had to really think about it afterwards, because we realized that there was a failure collaboration. There were very success in terms of individual projects, but that collaboration never gelled, and we couldn't work it out. Somehow in Chile, for whatever sets of circumstances, maybe it's because it was one project, we all have to submit to it. And there was the submission of the group, because we have the pressure of the real time to deliver. So we couldn't sort of, if we think that creativity is horizontal, we had to kind of submit to the pyramidal, and at the top was the project. And somehow, without even sort of thinking about this, we all submitted to it. And that kind of created a bonding between us, that it was really something that I have to really process a little more. I'm thinking going forward, and that interests me. But first we have to recognize of the me and the ego and the self. And once we remove that, then we maybe can go forward.